Have you ever wondered what it felt like to fall asleep behind the thick stone walls of a medieval castle? Not the kind from fairy tales. No magic spells or golden crowns here. Just silence, shadows, the sound of torches flickering in narrow halls, the feeling of stone cold under your feet, and dreams, soft as candlelight, drifting through corridors forgotten by time. Tonight, I'll take you there. You're watching The Silent Historian, and here we don't shout history, we whisper it. Stories of people long gone, but never really lost. So if you're ready to unwind, to slow your breath, and let your thoughts drift into another time, tap the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy seeing how far these quiet stories travel. Now, let the world fade. Close your eyes if you like, and let's begin. It was the kind of castle you don't find in fairy tales. No crowns, no grand halls, just weathered stone, quiet halls, and the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. High on a hill draped in mist, the castle stood alone, watching the world drift by. Inside, a young girl named Ellen moved barefoot through a narrow corridor, a clay jug held steady in her arms. She knew every curve of these walls, every creak in the stone, every breath the old place seemed to take when the rest of the world was asleep. She paused at a small arched window where glass, thick and imperfect, turned the night outside into a blur of moonlight and shadow. Somewhere beyond the trees and dog, she imagined the sea, a vast, endless thing she'd only heard about in whispers. In her mind she floated there now, in a boat made of stars, free from duty, drifting into peace. A voice called softly behind her, "Mirror," from the kitchen. It was time to tend the fire. The dream could wait. It always did. Above her, in the oldest part of the castle, a guard named Thomas walked his usual path. He didn't need light. The stone knew him. He paused by the chapel, bowed his head to a wooden dove carved long ago, and whispered something the wind carried away. Back in the great hall, Ellen sat near the hearth, the fire low, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She looked up at the faded tapestry, battles, knights, banners, but she liked the quiet parts between the stories best. Moments where nothing happened, moments like this. The bell chimed, slow and soft. Time for sleep. She climbed the cold stone stairs to her room, where the blanket smelled of lavender and last winter's sun. She didn't light her candle. She didn't need to. Shadows danced gently across the ceiling, and beyond the walls, the wind hummed through the trees. She closed her eyes, and somewhere beyond the mist, her dream began to sail. Night had deepened its hold over the castle, wrapping every stone and shadow in a hush so soft it felt sacred. The halls now held only the sound of sleep, of gentle breaths behind wooden doors and wind brushing quietly through high, narrow windows. But not everyone had gone to bed. In the tower room, Ellen sat upright beneath her blanket, her knees drawn to her chest, listening. Not to anything specific, just the feeling of the castle at night, alive in a way it never was by day. She had lit a candle after all, though its flame was small and steady, casting soft amber light across the stone wall beside her bed. Her eyes traced the patterns in the stone, ridges, flecks of iron, ancient marks from hands long gone. Somewhere outside an owl called. Ellen smiled. She imagined it watching her, just as she watched the world beyond the mist. At the same time, Thomas had stopped along the north battlement. His breath formed clouds in the cold air. He leaned slightly on the wall, looking out over the valley. Fog rolled across the hills, silver under the moon. He had walked these walls for so long that the stars themselves seemed to recognize him. And on nights like this, when the wind carried no threat and the castle was quiet, he felt the ache of memory more than the ache in his bones. He thought of the girl with the flower-dusted cheeks, the one who had once tied a red ribbon to his sword and laughed like she wasn't afraid of anything. She was long gone now. But on nights like this, he swore he could still hear her laughter in the stones. Down in the kitchen, Myra quietly added another log to the hearth. She didn't sleep well these days, not since the fever had come through last winter. She'd lost 2 friends to it, good women, honest ones. The silence after grief, she thought, is the loudest kind. She didn't cry anymore. But when the fire crackled just right, she felt them close by, like warmth that didn't come from flame. Ellen, still in bed, picked up a small object from beside her pillow. A smooth piece of driftwood the cook had given her once, said it came from the sea. She ran her fingers along it slowly, like it held a secret. Maybe it did. Maybe all the forgotten things in this castle did. Outside, the wind turned colder. The trees moved like they were breathing. And the castle, stone by stone, settled deeper into the dark. Somewhere in the chapel below, a candle flickered where none had been lit. And across the sky above, a falling star traced. Morning had not yet touched the sky, but the castle had changed. Not with sound. No bells, no footsteps, no clatter from the kitchens, but with feeling. Something in the walls, in the air itself felt heavier. Ellen stirred beneath her blanket, the candle long since gone cold. Her eyes blinked open, slow and soft, and for a moment she wasn't sure if she was still dreaming. The room looked the same. The stone walls, the frost on the window glass, the pale light of the moon slipping through. But something had shifted. She sat up, pulled the blanket tighter around her, and reached beneath her cot for the small box she kept hidden. Inside it, bits of thread, a silver button, and a folded piece of parchment she had found 3 years ago in the chapel floorboards. The ink was faded, the seal long broken, but the words, they stayed. "My heart will wait beyond the winter," it began, though the name was smudged. She had read it so many times, she knew the curve of every letter. She liked to think someone once waited by candlelight for this message, maybe in the same room, maybe with the same kind of hope. She held it to her chest now, as if the warmth of her hand could send it finally on its way. Somewhere beneath her, deep in the west wing, there was a door that hadn't been opened in years. No key, no reason, just a room no one spoke of. They said it was once a study, or maybe a nursery, or maybe it had always just been empty. Thomas had passed by it 1,000 times on his patrols. Tonight, for the first time, he stopped. His hand hovered near the rusted iron handle, but he didn't touch it. He didn't know why, but his breath caught for just a moment. He moved on, slowly, as if something behind that door might be listening. In the servants' hall, Mira stood alone near the hearth again, her hands wrapped around a cup of broth. She watched the flames, but thought only of the baby she'd once rocked to sleep in the laundry room, years ago, for a woman who'd wept quietly and left before spring. She wondered where they were now, if the boy remembered anything, if the woman ever smiled again. She never told anyone she'd grown to love that child like her own. Some doors stay shut not because they are locked, but because opening them means remembering too much. In her room, Ellen lay back down, the letter resting gently on her chest. Her eyes followed the flicker of moonlight as it moved across the ceiling stone. So many lives had passed through this place, so many wishes made, messages lost, stories untold. She wondered if walls remembered things, if empty rooms still listened, and with that thought, quiet and slow, she let her breathing soften. The castle sighed with her, and sleep came like the turning of a page. The castle had settled into silence again, the kind so deep it almost had a sound of its own, like snow falling, or a breath held for just a little too long. But beneath the silence, something stirred. Not loudly, not sharply, just faintly. Ellen first heard it as she rolled over in bed, the softest thump, like wood shifting under weight. Her eyes blinked open. She listened. It came again, slow, dull, as if someone were walking barefoot beneath the floor. But she knew no rooms lay below this one, only stone and years. She sat up, heart calm but curious, and placed her feet on the floor. The cold met her skin like a whispered reminder. This place is old, older than memory. She didn't feel afraid, just drawn. Carefully, she tiptoed to the corner of her room where the boards didn't quite sit even. She pressed her palm to the floor. Still now, silent. Perhaps it had only been a dream. Still, she whispered to the stone, almost without meaning to, "I hear you." Not far away, Thomas leaned on the southern wall of the battlement. He too had paused, not because of a noise, but because of a feeling. Something in the air or the ground below, a memory rising up from deep in the foundation. He remembered a story half told from when he was a boy, a priest who once hid books beneath the floorboards of the tower library, stories too dangerous to be read aloud. Some said they were burned, others said they were simply buried. Mira stirred in her sleep beside the fire, her hand twitching lightly on the armrest of her chair. In her dream, she stood in the chapel, holding a candle, walking toward a small door she'd never seen before. Her fingers reached for the handle, but the door opened on its own, and inside only quiet, a well of silence so deep it felt warm. Then nothing. She woke slowly, blinking, unsure if the glow beside her was the fire or a dream still hanging on. Below her room, Ellen pressed her ear to the floor one last time. Still no sound, still no proof. But her hand reached for the small letter again, almost without thought. She unfolded it, not to read it, but to hold it open. Something in her believed that whatever was down there already knew what it said. Outside, clouds had drifted across the moon, softening every shadow, and in the deep of the stone beneath the castle, something old shifted, slow, gentle. By morning the sound was gone. No thump, no echo. Only the gentle rustle of wind outside and the slow creak of old timbers stretching toward another day. Ellen remained still beneath her blanket, her eyes tracing a beam of pale light crawling across the ceiling. The letter still rested near her heart. She hadn't meant to fall asleep with it there, but somehow it felt right, like it belonged to the night more than the day. Downstairs, Mira stirred from the hearthside chair, her back stiff from sleeping upright. She stood slowly, adjusting her shawl, and began lighting the morning candles one by one. With each flame she whispered a name, not aloud but inwardly, as if sending thoughts out through the light. Some were names she hadn't spoken in years. A friend lost to illness, a sister she hadn't seen since the last snowfall of her youth, even a man who once offered her an apricot behind the orchard wall long before the war came. The flames flickered quietly, carrying memory like breath. Ellen finally rose, washing her face in the basin beside her bed, her fingers cold, her eyes thoughtful. She moved more slowly than usual, listening in that same way one listens after waking from a meaningful dream, one they can't quite remember but still feel. In the tower, Thomas had returned to the place he'd stood the night before. Nothing had changed. No strange lights. No sudden wind. Just a stillness so complete it almost felt like company. He looked out over the valley where the trees whispered without voices. He pulled a folded piece of cloth from his pocket, a handkerchief stitched with initials long since faded, and held it gently, as if it might dissolve if he breathed too hard. That morning in the small hall outside the unused chamber, the one with no key and no memory, a candle was found burning. No one claimed to have lit it. Its base was old, untouched by soot, yet its flames stood straight, unwavering. Mira noticed it first. She didn't question it. She only bowed her head and moved past, murmuring a soft blessing beneath her breath. Ellen, walking by later, paused. The door remained closed, still without a key, but the flame was steady, warm, inviting. She reached out, not to open the door, but to feel the heat of the candlelight. It pulsed gently against her skin, as if to say, "I remember too." That night, before sleep returned, Ellen wrote a letter of her own, not to anyone in particular, just to the castle. She tucked it beneath a loose stone at the edge of her bed, whispering into the quiet, "Keep it safe." The wind sighed through the tower's high window, and the castle, in its own way, nodded back. The castle never answered questions the way people do. It didn't speak in words or signs, but in softened air, creaking beams, and the gentle feeling that something was shifting beneath the silence. That morning, Ellen rose early, earlier than even Myra, her footsteps hushed against the cold stone, as if she feared waking the castle itself. A faint light slipped through the narrow window, and for the first time in days, the mist outside had begun to lift. She knelt at the base of her cot where she'd hidden the letter, hers, not the old one, tucked under the loose floor stone with careful fingers and sleepy hope. But something had changed. The stone that usually took effort to lift was already ajar, slightly. Not moved entirely, just shifted. Ellen's breath caught, not in fear, but in a strange kind of wonder. She lifted it slowly, and there, beside her folded paper, was something else. A button, small, silver, and scratched with age. Not hers, not new. She picked it up gently, turned it in her fingers. It looked like nothing, really. Ordinary, but in the castle, nothing ever truly was. Thomas, high above in the tower, paused mid-step. The air felt different, lighter somehow, though the clouds had returned. He pressed his palm against the stone ledge beside the battlement, and for a moment he imagined he could feel the pulse of the place, like a distant heartbeat, slow and steady. He closed his eyes, whispered a name he hadn't spoken since before the war, Marion. Below, Myra noticed a piece of parchment resting on the chapel's back bench. It hadn't been there the day before. It wasn't old, but it wasn't fresh either. She turned it over. No message, just a name, scrawled in small script. Anwen. She didn't recognize it, but she placed it beside the candle and whispered, "May you be remembered." and then she returned to the fire. Back in her small room, Ellen stood still with the button in her hand, unsure what to do. She sat quietly and unfolded both letters, hers and the old one she'd found years ago, and placed the silver button between them. As she looked down, her eyes caught on something she hadn't noticed before. Faint markings in the corner of the older parchment, nearly faded away. Not ink, impressed letters, embossed, a seal once pressed into wax. It read, "To return when heard." She didn't know what it meant, but it felt like the castle had finally spoken, softly, gently, in its own forgotten language. That night, before sleep came, Ellen set the button on the sill beside her bed. She didn't.
The castle in its endless patience had kept many things, some behind walls, some beneath floors, and some simply in the stillness between heartbeats. But the rarest things it kept were those that waited without being asked to, and somewhere between the echo of old footsteps and the scent of warm bread rising in the kitchen below, a room waited, not locked, not hidden, just forgotten. Ellen had passed by it for years, a narrow space at the end of the north wing where the corridor simply stopped. No door, no window, just a wall where something should have been. She'd never thought much of it before, but this morning, as light poured gently through the eastern glass and warmed the corridor's worn stones, she stopped. Something about the wall felt wrong, or right in a way she couldn't explain. She placed her hand against it, cold, uneven stone beneath her fingertips, and for a moment the castle felt like it was listening. She knelt quietly, running her palm along the base of the wall, where dust had settled like memory, and there, behind a patch of dry lichen, she found a seam. Not large, not deep, just enough to trace a line. Her breath stilled. She pressed lightly. Nothing moved, but something shifted. In her chest. In the silence. That evening, Thomas walked the corridor alone. He noticed her footprints, bare and light as whispers, and he paused. He didn't ask, he didn't knock, but when he reached the end of the hall, he bowed his head, not in prayer, but in recognition. Some walls, he had learned, held more kindness than many people. Down below, Mira was tending to a pot of lavender oil, humming a tune older than her bones, her hands steady even as her heart trembled with something she couldn't name. She had walked past that same blank wall decades earlier once with a child in her arms and a question in her soul. She never asked what lay beyond. She just hoped it was peaceful. Now, Ellen sat outside the blank wall that had once seemed so ordinary. She didn't try to open it. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened the letter she had written and read it aloud, softly, slowly, as if the words were meant for someone nearby. Her voice didn't echo. It settled, like ash on still water, and when she was finished, she placed the letter on the ground, beside a sprig of rosemary she had taken from the kitchen, and whispered, "If you are waiting, you can rest now." The wind moved through the corridor in answer, gentle, slow, carrying no chill, just warmth. That night, the blank wall remained just a wall, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full. Full of names and wishes, and a stillness that wrapped itself around the castle like a blanket. And when Ellen returned to her room, sleep came not like a story ending, but like one just beginning. It didn't happen with thunder, not with light or movement, just the feeling that something had changed, like when a long-held breath is finally let go. The wall at the end of the corridor looked the same, solid stone, smooth and unbroken. But as Ellen passed it that evening, carrying a bundle of clean linen in her arms, she felt a warmth there that hadn't been present before. She paused, set the bundle down, pressed her hand to the wall once more, and this time she heard it. Not a voice, not a word, just a memory, humming softly from within the stone, so old, so gentle, it felt like music made of silence.
Her eyes filled with tears she didn't understand. She whispered, "I hear you," and the wall, though still and cold, felt alive beneath her palm. That night, Mira sat quietly by the hearth, rubbing rosemary oil into her hands. She said nothing, just watched the fire's slow glow and remembered a dream she'd once had, of a room full of sunlight and laughter behind a wall no one ever opened. She'd been too young to hold on to it, but the warmth still lived somewhere in her bones. Thomas stood once again on the north tower, the wind brushing gently past him like an old friend. He smiled for no reason, or maybe for every reason. He didn't need to walk anymore. Not tonight. He stayed still, let the castle breathe without him. In her room, Ellen opened her window, letting in the wind for the first time. The letter she'd written no longer lay under stone, and she hadn't written a new one. There was no need. The silence around her was full now, of names, of wishes, of things finally at rest. She climbed into bed, leaving the window open, and stared at the stars. The moonlight touched the silver button on her windowsill, casting a soft glow that felt like a blessing. Somewhere beneath the floor, or behind the walls, or just in the still air between the stones, something old had finished its waiting, and in its place, peace had settled. Not loud, not proud, just there, present, like sleep, like love, like a secret finally returned to where it belonged. Ellen closed her eyes, and this time, when she dreamed, she didn't sail away. She drifted inward, where the castle held her like a memory worth keeping, and the wall, at last, was silent again.
The castle no longer whispered. It didn't need to. Whatever story had stirred beneath its stones had been told. Not aloud, not in letters or voices, but in moments, in the hush between heartbeats, in the kindness of those who paused to listen. Days passed softly after that. Ellen moved through the halls with a calmness she hadn't known before. She still lit candles, still fetched water, still knelt beside the fire to warm her hands in the morning, but something had changed, not in the tasks, but in the spaces between them. A kind of still joy had settled into the stone, like the castle itself had taken a deep breath, and now, finally, was resting. Mira seemed to move more slowly too, her humming gentler, as if her memories no longer weighed down her voice. She no longer glanced nervously toward the chapel shadows. Instead, she left Rosemary on the ledge every third morning, without asking why. And Thomas, he stopped walking the walls at night. Not because he couldn't, because he didn't feel the need. He sat near the tower window now, sometimes for hours, just watching the stars. "It's held long enough," he once whispered, barely loud enough for the stone to keep. That evening, as dusk slipped over the hills and the wind grew soft again, Ellen sat by her open window with the silver button in her palm. She didn't wonder where it came from anymore. Some things are gifts without stories. She held it close for a moment, then placed it into a small wooden box, along with the old letter, not to hide them, just to let them rest. Outside, the fog rolled gently across the valley, like a lullaby spun from earth and sky. The castle, now silent again, felt like it was sleeping, not empty, but dreaming. And Ellen, with her head resting lightly on her folded arms, watched the light fade until stars appeared in the dark above. Her breath slowed, her thoughts softened, and as her eyes finally closed, the wind wrapped around the tower like a blanket. The floor didn't creak, and no doors called out to be opened. All was still, all was full. The castle dreamed with her now, and in that dream nothing needed to be found, nothing needed to be fixed, only remembered, only loved and kept. So, the castle rests, as do the stories it kept safe. Thank you for sharing this quiet hour with me.
where the stones remember and the silence speaks. If the story brought you peace, if it wrapped around you like a soft blanket at the end of a long day, then I invite you to stay a little longer. There are more stories waiting, gentle ones, patient ones, and they'll be here when you need them. If you felt something tonight, if the stillness stayed with you, then please like this video and subscribe to The Silent Historian for more calm journeys into the past. Until next time, sleep softly and let the story keep dreaming for you.